Hello and welcome once again to episode 139 of Code Completion. We're a group of iOS developers and educators hoping to share what we love most about development, Apple technology, and completing your code. My name is Dimitri, and I'll be your host once again for this episode, and I'm joined today by my fellow completionist, Spencer.
Hey there.
So once again, we have some new Swift evolution updates, this time concerning macros, but macros are now real, so we can talk about them in more detail. And this one is to kind of now that people have been playing around with macros, there's obvious cleanup that has escaped the initial design phase, and now that people are using it, it's become obvious what needs to change about them. And it seems like there's a proposal to kind of get that going before Swift 5.9 actually goes out. So that's really cool.
Yeah, looks cool. I uh was kind of looking at this, and I suppose like the main part about this extension macro thing is just to allow you to put the conformances of specific types in that like at attached macro. Is that kind of the whole thing there?
Yeah, so the conformance macro, which this is considering replacing, it just adds, hey, this conforms to this protocol, and that's it, which is
Right.
not useful if you don't also add an implementation that goes along with it. Uh,
Mm.
so uh, the the new type, which is an extension macro, adds conformance, including a possible where clause, but also adds the actual conformance to the
Ah, I see. Okay.
protocol that you're adding conformance to. So it would add the method implementation that will go ahead and do the work. So if you were to imagine an equatable macro, which is actually a macro just built into the Swift compiler, if you want to think of it that way.
Oh,
Like when you mark a type as equatable and you don't do anything extra,
right.
it's synthesizing an equatable function for you. And I think there's a way in Xcode that I'm forgetting off the tip of my mind of like how to see what the implementation is, but you can see what it generates
Oh,
for you. But yeah, it's something that's generated by the compiler just by looking at all your properties and saying, well, if this is equal and this is equal and this is equal and this is equal, that's
mhm.
why you need equatable conformance for all your individual properties. Otherwise, that code isn't going to
Right.
work.
That
And
breaks.
yeah, so it's very simple, and this kind of allows it to be declared outside of the compiler, so that way it's not like magic. Um, and I think that's the general goal with these Swift changes, especially with like property wrappers. At lazy was magic, right? With property
Mhm.
wrappers, it no longer needs to be magic. It can go ahead and be something that's implemented in code, and then you can get at lazy. You can get all sorts of different behaviors. So
Gotcha.
that's what this is kind of also enabling. Um,
Cool.
yeah. Uh, Another thing that Apple has gone ahead and released, and this was just a surprise, I think,
Mhm.
is a new package, open source, called Swift HTTP types, and this is a package that just contains a whole bunch of types related to the HTTP um, spec, and it will go ahead and allow you to, instead of hard code 200, you can just say .ok.
Yeah.
It gives you request and response like currency types that you can go ahead and model HTTP requests and HTTP responses. Um, it will go ahead and give you access to headers in a type safe way, that's finally according to like the headers that are part of the spec. You have to match the spec. If
Yeah.
they're custom, you can just put whatever you want in them. That's totally fine. But that gives a lot more a lot more consistency to kind of modeling all of this. And I think this is the best part. It's available for both URL session, so there's like overloads to just use it with URL session in your apps, and SwiftNIO. So if you're
Right.
on the server, you can also use these types. And I think that's
Yeah.
the motivation behind a lot of this is there's kind of this bifurcation between URL session in apps and SwiftNIO on server-based apps. And there's not really a lot of consistency between like how things are kind of uh, described if you did want to have a cross-platform app. So this makes it a lot more consistent, and it seems to me like it's replacing part of the foundation, what Foundation provided early on for
Mm,
URLs, just with a better API that is kind of outside of what Apple ships with the operating system, right? And
mhm.
allows it to be evolved separately along with that until it reaches some stability point where it's not really changing anymore. Then it can be brought in, but as of now, it's something completely separate, which I think is pretty cool.
Yeah, I'm very excited about this. Yeah, with like using Vapor, I forget if it's HTTP status or HTTP response status, but those have existed for like .ok and stuff. So it's nice to kind of have some parity between uh, uh, things that use Neo and things that use URL session. And I'm not actually sure if there are um, type safe ways of getting like headers either. I think you might have had to write those even in Vapor. So yeah, good stuff all around. I'm super stoked to bring this in and just start using it, um, both in Vapor and honestly just in Apple Land as well. So that's great.
Yeah, and I imagine this removes some of the burden on Vapor to provide all these types, and they can
Hmm.
simplify as a result, and then just rely on this package
Yeah.
to provide the missing pieces. So all around, very cool to see that here.
Yep. And fun that it's coming from Apple and just
Yeah,
basically a first party thing. Like it's the right thing and it's actually going to get adoption because of it. It already
yeah,
has 105 stars and it has 2 commits. It came out like last week or something. So yeah.
Yeah, it's really cool seeing all these first party packages from Apple, because then they just become optional packages that you can potentially use or potentially not use. The only sad thing about this is you can't just use it in like a command line app without the full package, not a command line app, but a Swift what's the term for it? Uh script.
Oh,
So
sure.
you can't just like write a Swift file and then just run it. If you wanted to use any of these things, you need to make a full package, which is a little bit heavy when all you
Mhm.
wanted to do is something quick and dirty. And you see that with like the Swift argument parser. It's like the perfect thing for a script file that you just can't use because it's a package that you would need to you would have needed to import
Right.
to be able to use. So I hope that these over time, since they are first party packages, do get bundled in as a part of the OS and as a part of the runtime, but that they stay packages for cases where you want to use a slightly newer version.
Sure.
Then you can go ahead and do that. So that allows quite a bit of flexibility. Though, as we said last time with the observability, um, protocol coming in, that introduces new types, and therefore that is not background deployable. And it's not something that you can just like import the new version in your app and have that play nice with the version that's bundled in with the OS. So we're going to have to see how that evolves with Swift over time, because it certainly, I would say, is a problem for how the language is kind of bifurcating in this open source
Right.
domain, but also in the closed source domain, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Real quick, we have someone in the YouTube chat asking, I've been looking at Vapor recently. What's your view of its growth in the foreseeable future? Um, I'll definitely let Dimitri answer this, but kind of if you've been following server side Swift for years, I kind of started looking at it in like 2016, 2017. There were like 3 or 4 different kind of server side Swift frameworks. And Vapor ended up winning out, and I don't think any of the other ones exist anymore. The other big one was like Katura, which was backed by IBM, and I don't think it exists anymore, which is kind of crazy. Um, so as far as the growth goes, I think you know it's here to stay. Tim, I forget his last name, is the
Condon.
maintainer. What's that? Condon, yes, is the maintainer, and I think there are quite a few contributors to the project, and I don't particularly see any reason why it would go away. He or maybe it was someone else on Mastodon, has said that like internally at Apple, it sounds like they're perhaps using Vapor for some things. Take that with a grain of salt, but I would say that it's a very viable thing. I know that real companies use it, perhaps Apple excluded, but yeah, I don't know. What do you think?
Yeah, there is one other server side framework that I know of that's called Hummingbird that's relatively new.
Okay.
So that one is also available if you wanted an alternative to Vapor, which is always healthy. But Vapor, I think, is here to stay. There are several big production apps that are built using it. It's ready for prime time. It is being used heavily, and it does things quite well. So if it is something that you want to look into, it's a whole lot easier to get started with now that there's no
Yeah.
futures and promises to
Yes.
learn. Although that is like a very good like mental exercise to get accustomed to, because it does prepare you very well for working with
Hmm.
asynchronous code. But now that you can just use async await, that makes it a whole ton easier to kind of deal with in general. And they're actively pushing to use asynchronous sequences and stuff like that more and more. So it's getting there, and getting to a very good place that makes it very easy to go ahead and use, especially if you're just building an iOS app and you need a server component. It's easy
Hmm.
to get.
Yeah, definitely.
In other news, Apple also released beta threes of everything. So this includes visionOS. This does not include visionOS. This includes iOS, tvOS, macOS, watchOS, and Xcode. visionOS is missing from this, which is weird, but that's the way it is.
Yeah.
And yeah,
We're still on beta 1 of visionOS, right? There
yep.
was no beta 2. Yeah. Okay.
There's no beta 2
Yeah.
yet.
Yeah, interesting. An interesting part about beta 3 of Xcode specifically is that Paul Hudson noticed that the 10 view limit on a SwiftUI view is gone. So you don't need to
Finally.
use a group anymore. So that means we've got macros, baby. They must be integrated in, and
It's not macros.
is it not?
It's the type packs and the parameter packs.
Oh, okay.
The
Okay, okay.
magic of Swift generics.
Mm, that's awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah, very exciting though.
I haven't played around with it. I do wonder if that limits you to the latest iOS and macOS versions, or if that does back deploy to earlier versions. Like a
Yeah.
lot of Swift and UI improvements over the years have back deployed gracefully. So I wonder if this is one of those. I think it is, because it's just a function addition, and any function addition uh, basically back deploys if Apple wants it to. So that would be a good thing, and to see, and to finally kind of free ourselves of that unfortunate ness. Um,
Yes.
so we'll see.
Hmm.
Another awkward thing is that TestFlight added support for Vision OS apps, so that way you can test them on your Vision Pros that you don't have,
Yeah.
and you can submit them with the betas of Vision OS SDK that don't exist. So it's like a little weird that it's available. It's good that it's available first, but they probably could have held the announcement for um, just a few more weeks to align with everything else, I would say.
Yeah. I mean, to be fair, the update page and the news and updates thing on the developer page just lists like you can submit apps with Xcode for iOS and iPadOS and visionOS. So it's not just like a specific, hey, we're letting you submit visionOS things. It's just like all of the betas can,
Hmm.
you can submit apps for the betas. So yeah. But yes, I understand where you're coming from as well.
So a little weird.
A little bit. We also have an update for the game porting toolkit, which I love that that people are trying to just like get like normal people are just trying to get games running on Mac OS, and they're not really using it as like game developers to port it. They're just like, I can run Windows games on my computer now, on my Mac now. So it it was a couple days that I watched this video, so I can't quite remember, but there were anywhere from incremental to pretty decent updates in frame rates from like Cyberpunk 2077 was like frames per second to like 20 something, I think, if I remember right. Elden Ring had a smaller update. So, I mean, that's cool. I guess Apple's doing some work behind the scenes to improve it. But again, this is not really, as much as I wish it was, it's not really a tool for the end user to just play Windows games. It's to port the games. But no one cares about that, which I think is really funny. So,
Yeah, it reminds me of a recent video by Linus Tech Tips, where he went ahead and just got an Xserve to run
yeah,
games, but then the GPU would not fit in the Xserve, so he had like this crazy
riser
extension
cable.
PCI riser cable to like get the GPU working, and then everything was good. The hard drive that had all the games died,
Yeah.
and those are the ones that are keyed, so you can't just put any hard drive in there. And then finally, the real kicker was Steam is dropping support for this version of Steam in 77 days, and that
Yeah.
was the last version that would run. So it's like, good thing they're getting the video out now, I guess. Uh,
Yeah. When
but
yeah, when was the last Xserve made? Like 2011 or something? It's so old.
a long time ago.
Yeah.
I guess you can think of the new Mac Pro as like a new modern version of the X Serve. So it's like, it
Sure.
fits the GPUs at least, or at least the 2019 model does. Um, so
Let's see. 2009. Yeah. That was the last Xserve. They're pretty freaking old. And they had to use like an old Nvidia card because it was actually still
yeah, the last
supported.
supported one. It was
Yeah. It was a good video. I
uh,
enjoyed it.
very fun. But yeah, it's all in all seriousness, I wonder if the game porting toolkit is going to be enough. Because it does only show you a preview of what your game will run at.
Mhm.
It doesn't package your game. Like if you think, oh, this looks good, package it up. It
Right.
does not do that. It provides, like, this is really the first step of the game porting toolkit that everyone's kind of looking at. The second step does do some translation. It allows you to use all your shaders as is and
Right.
compile them as metal shaders, which is really good. But then the third step is rewrite your game to run on Mac OS, which
Yeah.
is a bit more daunting for a lot of folks, especially when you have to like just generally rethink your whole graphics pipeline.
Mhm.
Like everything up until the shaders is significant, and you have to just like rethink all of that for macOS, which might be quite the burden. So, yeah, I don't know what to think about that part. To see if like real games are ever going to, I say real, um,
Mhm.
to see if the AAA style games are ever going to make it over to the Mac. Obviously, the Mac, but as an extension of iOS, has a lot of games. It's just not the types of games that people who play capital G games like to think about as games. Which that's like a whole nother thing. It's like maybe people are uh were like choosing between movies and TV shows. Like movies are the real thing and TV shows are the fake
Yeah,
things.
yeah, yeah,
I
yeah.
would akin it to that. It's the same media, same type of quality for the most part, but the way that it's delivered is slightly different. And at a certain point, you start getting 2 hour long TV shows that just have like 12 episodes, and at that point, the budget is quite a bit larger than a movie.
Yes.
And it seems like the line is blurring more and more. So we'll see if we ever get like full quality AAA games. I say with giant air quotes in the future.
Yeah.
But it remains to be seen.
Indeed, it does. What also remains to be seen is what we talked about last episode, which would be a 32-inch iMac. Seems like that's been a little bit delayed.
Womp
So,
womp.
yeah, shocker. Sounds like Mark Gurman said that he warned in his weekly newsletter that it's still in the early stages of development and it'll come in late 2024 at the earliest. So, that's a little bit of a bummer. And then on top of that, a M3 powered iMac is also uh, he previously predicted that it would be out in late 2020, before the end of 2023, and now he's saying early 2024. So we don't have a an M2 powered iMac, do we?
Nope, it's still the M1.
Yeah, yeah. So it's gonna skip a generation, I guess, and that's that. So
Yeah, which is honestly fine. Like, I don't
yeah,
think that the M2 is for everyday computing a drastic game changer
no,
over the M1. And the type of folks that would want an iMac are the folks that would want one for an everyday computing device, right?
yes,
This is something that is stationary at a desk. You get a nice big screen, comfortable input methods, and it does computery things just fine. You're not
yeah,
making a movie, you're not developing, you're not pushing it hard to any extent. It's just fast at everything it does. That's the kind of device that people want out of an iMac. Sure, you can get a Mac Mini, but then you need to get a separate monitor, and
yes,
it's like a whole thing that people don't really want to think about. It doesn't even come with a keyboard and mouse, right? People don't want to think about that when they just need a computer and they don't want to do anything else. They just want something that they can put on their desk and use. The iMac is the solution to that. The alternative is a laptop, right? But then a
right.
laptop, it has different constraints. It's much smaller. Yes, you can move it around, but then you have to worry about like charging it and stuff like that, which some people like are more than okay with, to be clear. But other people just want something stationary. And that's always there and always available. So we'll see when the next iMacs come out. I think a lot of people will be very happy if they still come in colors, and extremely saddened if they don't. Um, I am
I'd be
not that
so
person,
surprised.
but
I'd be so surprised if they don't keep the colors.
it would be a
I don't know.
travesty, honestly.
They would.
Like, it's so
They just
fun. It's the funnest part of an Apple store. You walk in
yeah,
and you have that corner with all 5 or 6 iMacs that are just lined up. It's so nice looking. And then you have everywhere else is just like gray. And
yeah,
then in another corner, you have the colorful iPhones from last year. And
yeah.
it's like, come on, Apple, more color.
I know, dude. I will buy them the dye because I know that's how you dye metal. I don't actually know how you do it, but
You
I
add
will
other
buy the
metals to it.
dye. Okay, well, maybe I won't. Dye sounds a lot cheaper than extra metals, but I just want colored everything, man.
Yeah.
So,
It reminds me of coloring glass. I was very surprised to hear that, like, oh, you add gold to glass to make it blue. I don't remember if that's the actual like
oh wow,
color, but yeah, it's you add a little bit of metal to the glass, and then it gives it a hue based on how like electrons bounce off the metal atoms individually rather than as like a surface. And they add color to the glass, and that's how you
that's
get this
crazy.
beautiful stained glasses from like old cathedrals and stuff like that. It's just they sprinkled in a little copper, a little silver, a little gold. You don't
When
need a
it's
lot.
when it's
Um,
molten,
yeah, when it's
and they like
molten.
mix it.
Hmm.
Wow, that's cool.
And you get transparent
Okay,
glass, transparent colored glass. So it's not at all the color you think. It's not like you get silver out of silver,
sure,
right?
yeah.
So really cool
Huh.
stuff. I think it's based on like the oxidation colors. So like with copper, you get
Okay,
like blue and greens. I think. But my chemistry is not a degree, and it hasn't been further educated for the past 10 years. So I might be way off on that. So don't quote me.
let's consult Nile Red. He
Yeah.
could surely tell us.
Um, And elsewhere in the rumor mill, we have next gen AirPods that might be coming with accurate temperature monitor sensors. So this is in opposition to the temperature tracker in Apple Watches, which just checks the change in temperature over time, because it turns out the
Mhm.
top of your wrist is not the greatest place to check like your temperature. It's way colder than your actual body. So you can't get an actual like measurement from that, but inside of your ear canal,
That's
that's a
pretty
different
good.
story. In fact,
Yeah,
that's what doctors tend to use. They just put a thing in your
yes.
ear and they get a beep and they get a temperature. So that's definitely something that Apple could play around with over time. And it would be quite cool to have just a constant reading of your temperature if you use AirPods. So definitely thumbs up to that.
Yeah, definitely. That's a fun. I mean, that's the kind of thing that, like, isolated, it seems super weird, but, like, I'm sure there are good uses for it. So that's cool.
I mean, just warning you that your temperature is rising rapidly, like
Yeah. Like,
before
hey, are
you
you getting
feel
sick?
the fever symptoms like really hitting you, it's like, oh, like this is going to explain a whole lot over what's coming over the next 2 hours, and then you know when it's done, right?
Mhm.
Where versus like constantly checking the temperature, is it done yet? No. Check again in 30 minutes, kind of thing. So,
I
um,
yeah.
not that
I
you're
just
gonna be
mean,
wearing
like,
your AirPods like while you're sick in bed. It's like
yeah.
keep the temperature tracking, though maybe, right, there's nothing
Maybe.
wrong with that. If the noise cancellation doesn't give you a major headache along with
Right.
the fever, then you're probably going to be fine. So
Yeah. I just mean, like, imagine another company being like, "Our headphones have temperature tracking." You'd be like,
cool.
"Mm, yeah." So it would be a more of a gimmick, but,
Yeah,
yeah.
but if they had a whole ecosystem of like health
Ah,
tracking, then it suddenly clicks together.
yeah.
And finally, in the rumor mill, we have OLED iPads and MacBooks, which are both coming and not coming soon. Who knows? OLED, it's magic. We want it
Yeah.
everywhere. Maybe.
Yeah, interesting. We've talked in the past that, like the 12.9-inch iPad Pro right now uses mini LED. The 11 just uses LED. So they kind of, it seems like they want to, and same thing for the MacBook Pros as well, use mini LED. Uh, we've talked in the past about them using micro LEDs, so maybe that's just taking longer than they thought it would, because this says that Apple's release plan to release MacBook Pros with OLED displays has been pushed to 2027. So I don't even know where micro LED is in this pipeline. 2032 or something. I don't know. Uh, so yeah, I guess they're kind of foregoing the idea of micro LED.
Well, they're
Uh,
probably
at
checking
this
it out
time.
like simultaneously,
Sure.
right?
Yeah.
Whichever technology wins out, they clearly don't need to move over yet. There's no like pressure from other tablet manufacturers to go ahead and
True.
like force them to change. And the screens on MacBooks seem pretty okay, and more than okay on the MacBook Pros. So, um, yeah, I'm not
Is
convinced that we need them super soon.
No, agreed. For me, this came out of nowhere because I just thought the plan was just, micro LED all the way. The Pro
If they
Display
can
XDR,
exist.
yes, true. The Pro Display XDR, is it mini LED or is it OLED?
Yeah, it's mini LED with
Okay,
fewer LEDs than the new MacBook Pros, which
that's
is
right.
hilarious considering its price.
Yes.
But I don't think Apple's going to bother making a new one anytime soon. Which because
No.
if they did, it would be way cheaper because they have the whole manufacturing pipeline for the MacBook Pros. That the whole machine costs less than the display. So, um, yeah, I
Yeah.
don't know what to think in that regard. Eventually, I can see them like updating the Pro Display XDR to have potential. Like if they wanted to keep the price point, here's my
Yes.
hypothesizing, right? They use the new backplane, which is basically a circuit board with LEDs. That's the magic of what makes the MacBook Pros possible. The Pro Display XDR had a whole bunch of individual LEDs with like these cones, and it needed the distance to like illuminate. But if you have a bunch of very small LEDs very close, which is what the MacBook Pros have, then you don't really need all that. So,
Mhm.
um, you have that. Okay. Now you have an LCD layer, and if you wanted to have much better blacks, you just have another LCD layer that you
Right.
perfectly line
That's
up.
black and white.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that gives you like it basically multiplies the uh the what's that called?
Contrast?
Yeah, the contrast ratio. It multiplies it so that way you get much darker blacks. And as long as you have really bright lights on the other end, you get
Yeah.
some bright whites. So that's essentially how they can make the Pro Display XDR much better without going to OLED, without having burn in and keeping the same price point that they want to keep, if they want to keep it.
Okay.
So that could be one way that they make the Pro Display XDR stand out from a 27-inch that also has micro LEDs, or mini LEDs, I should clarify. So like everyone can have HDR. The Pro Display XDR has XDR, kind of thing. So
Right.
that's the way I see it.
I'm just hoping that self-servingly, I hope that they come out with a new display, a new Pro Display XDR, so the one that you have will devalue, and I can eventually buy one because I just bought a Thunderbolt display. I know it's like 10 years old at this point, but I just bought it for $30 or sorry, $80, and I was stoked. So just need to add to the collection. Uh, I just love the back of those, and yeah, it'd
Spencer's
be fun.
house is turning into a museum of Apple products,
I know.
one
I'm
device
up
at
to
a
like
time.
I'm up to like 5 Mac Minis and a trash can that all just kind of sit around, and yeah, it's fun.
So the energy bill just keeps climbing. Is like, what am I spending all this energy
Yeah.
on? It's like the AC has been off.
Oh man. Well,
It's okay. The energy will stop rising as soon as like you enter the M generation. Once we're at the M15 or whatever, and you're
hmm
like, you're back acquiring the M2s, M3s, M4s.
yeah,
Like they all use nothing, and they're
10
just
watts
like
max.
all on at the same time. You have a wall of Mac Minis with blinking lights.
That's awesome. Still using less power than like a single filament bulb, so we're good.
Yeah, you have a filament bulb right next to it, and then a wall of Mac Minis. How much computing power does your light bulb?
That's awesome.
Yet the
Uh,
filament bulb still outputs more light than all the LEDs of the Mac Minis combined. It's like,
oh,
ooh,
yeah.
burn.
So such a burn.
uh, One day.
One day,
Uh,
indeed.
uh, Talking about one days. One day you'll be able to order Vision Pro. We don't know when that is, but when it does come, apparently the Vision Pro is going to require appointments for the final fit. So this is going to be awkward for the introverts and pandemic aware verse folks
Yeah,
like us who don't want to be just like going into an Apple store and taking off a mask to like fit a bunch of pieces of foam that probably touched a whole bunch of other people's faces.
yep,
Um, but yeah, it seems like that's going to be required for ultimate comfort. So we'll see what Apple does once it does finally come out. They are not expecting to sell a lot of these. They were initially
yeah,
expecting to sell like one per day per store, with like a million units estimated sold. And then as
yeah,
soon as they did the announcement, they're like, our current estimate's 100,000, one per week per store or something. So they're not expecting to sell a whole lot of these,
yeah,
um, which is fair. They are super expensive, and everyone reacted as such. But to those of us who do want to get one, it seems like we'll have to go to the store to get fit, which, if it makes you feel any better, only a handful of people will probably have gone through that process. So might be better. I don't know.
yeah. Silver lining.
Silver
Um,
lining.
this 9 to 5 Mac article says it pretty well. Says much of the logistical complexity is a product of how many variations of accessories will exist. So they'll offer different headbands and light seals, just to like make the perfect fit. And I guess I get why they're doing it, right? For such an expensive device, they want to make sure that you have the best experience, but like that's a lot to ask for and deal with up front to be like, I want this thing, give it to me. And they're like, whoa, 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 you got to get your haircut first and make sure, this all fits around you. Uh, I see why they're doing it, but it's a lot. So very interesting. And I'm interested. I'm sure someone's going to make a YouTube video on this whole experience, and it's just going to be ridiculous. Like they're sectioning off a part of their store just for the try-on area. I mean, it's a whole thing, and I guess that's what they have to do to make sure that you have a good experience with this thing that's the price of a used car. So
It's a very fancy used car, Spencer.
yes, can't drive around in it. So point taken from point to old cars. I should mention though, they did say that Apple is developing a face scanning app that'll help pick the right light seal and everything, probably using the Face ID array and everything. So that would potentially help if it gets to the point where you can use that instead of, and they like let you use that instead of going into the Apple Store. That'd be nice.
Yeah, maybe you can't order online, but you can order through the Apple Store app, right? Because
Right.
because you can then use all those sensors to get an accurate view of your face. So
Right. Yeah. Yep. And they're talking about making a top strap to help with people with smaller heads, and working with other people that other companies to develop accessories to like hold the battery because no one wants to put it in their pocket type of thing. So seems like things are developing with this whole thing.
I mean, there's already that one case maker, and I'm not going to find the link for it at this point, but they had like the whole shock absorbers around the things. It's like in
Oh
case
my
you like dropped
gosh.
it, I guess. Um,
Yes.
expect ridiculous cases to come out for this device. They will be funny. This week's episode of Code Completion is once again brought to you by Explain It Slowly. Have you ever wondered how anime is made, or how old TVs work, or even why you start picking up other people's accents just by hanging out with them? Welcome to Explain It Slowly, a podcast where Lynn and I explore any and every topic from technology to food twice a week. We've covered everything from SSDs to food comas, and can't wait to share what we've learned next with all of you. So open up your favorite podcast app and search for Explain It Slowly to learn something new with us every week. We want to thank Explain It Slowly for sponsoring our show. Search for Explain It Slowly on your favorite podcast app, or visit https://explainitslowly.show to learn more. So, Spencer, I've got a code completion tip for you today.
All right.
Have you ever designed an icon for a button and it just felt off? It wasn't quite positioned right next to other buttons, and it just
Mm-hmm.
you like selected everything, got the bounding box, got the center to line, and it's just not looking good, right?
Yep.
Okay. Well, David Smith, who is underscore David Smith on Mastodon, shared an excellent tip for solving that problem. Blur your shape and visually center it. So once you blur your shape,
Mm.
then you start to get a sense for not its hard edges, but where it visually falls, where its center of gravity is. And that's what you're actually interested in. You're interested in that center of gravity, where all the shapes kind of center around, regardless of where their bounding boxes are. The simplest example of this is a play button, right? A play button is an equilateral triangle,
Yeah.
which, if you were to center, you have it would be positioned way too much towards. I
The
think
left.
it would be too much towards the left, right?
Yeah.
Because the center of that equilateral triangle is not the width divided by 2. It's
Mm-hmm.
where all the points of the triangle meet
Meet in the middle.
in the
Right.
middle. And visually, if you were to blur that, you get a perfect circle, and it's like, oh yeah, that's where that goes. So if you have a much more complicated shape and you're not sure where that would go, just blur the whole thing, and then just see where does the blur look like it has a center, and then just align that, and then you're good. So
That's so interesting. Yeah. Yeah. Eyes are weird, man.
it's not so much eyes, it's just the fact that bounding boxes are not how we should center things at all, but it's how computers are like, yeah, this looks like a center.
Okay.
So, like, if you were to try to center it visually, you would probably do a much better job than the computer. And then you like turn on
Oh,
snapping and you're like, oh, I guess the computer said this is the center. So this is the
right.
center, Whereas
Mhm.
you were much closer, even though like you were off horizontally or whatnot. So yeah, definitely A
Cool.
plus tip from underscore David Smith. I never thought of that, and I am committing it to memory because it is the best way to get those icons perfectly positioned. And this week on completion curiosities, these are two things that I found over the past few weeks browsing the web, and I found were endlessly fascinating. So I decided to share them all with you today. The first is font size. Font size is something that is not totally based in reality and is kind
Yeah.
of completely useless. And Sophia on Mastodon shared a link to a blog called Tonsky.me that just kind of goes on to why font size is useless and gives some very quick examples of like, hey, if you have these different fonts and they're all at the same size, there's a reason why they
They're
look
not.
all different. And that's because everything is arbitrary and digital fonts kind of don't really know what they're doing and it's a mess. And let's just stop listening to digital fonts with regard to font size, and let's just kind of figure this out from scratch and make it a whole lot better. I highly recommend if you're interested in text and type in any amount to read this because it goes into a whole lot of detail of like the why and how. And namely, font size is not all, right? And once you get the font sizes matched, now you have the font weights to deal with, which is a whole nother thing that you would want to match. So this is just like the beginning of the rabbit hole for type connoisseurs out there to kind of get lost in, and I was very fascinated by it.
Yeah, it was very interesting, and he goes into some like proposed fixes on like how to make it better and how to actually make fonts consistent between different fonts, line heights, and everything. It was very cool. I really enjoyed it. It would be uh, fun to see this change. It just where we, as in people that make computers and operating systems, are just stuck in the past of like when it was actually like a letterpress, like the actual metal blocks that you would press onto a piece of paper. Like that's where this is all coming from. We're like still stuck on that when we could be doing this in a lot better way. So it was really cool.
Yeah, and to be fair, it's not just like the web that is afflicted by this.
Hmm.
Even Big Sur, most recently,
Yeah.
kind of shot the can on aligning type correctly. And he shows a an example between Catalina and Big Sur, where Catalina did everything right, and Big Sur kind of just like went, well, whatever.
Awesome.
And nothing is aligned anymore. So if you've ever tried to align shape, welcome to aligning text. It's a whole lot more complicated. And yeah, hopefully this can help you understand why it's complicated and maybe make some slightly better decisions as you design your apps.
Yes.
Number two on my list of curiosities for this week are a set of predictions from 1997, which are eerily relevant, and it's kind of amazing how relevant they are. And yeah, I was a little scared.
Yep. It was pretty crazy. The whole thing was uh basically like you could we could potentially achieve utopia by 2020. And these they said scenario spoilers, or in other words, negative events that might send it in a worse direction. They list 10 of these scenario spoilers. Almost all of them basically happened, which is like, holy crap, like Nostradamus level predictions. It was crazy. So, yeah, super, super cool
Yeah,
and scary.
generally we are like horrible at predicting the future. Is like, oh yeah, we're gonna have flying cars, and it's like still no flying cars, but we have supercomputers in our pockets. Who saw that coming, right?
Yeah.
And it's like, oh, everyone's gonna be an advanced civilization. No, we're using the supercomputers to watch YouTube videos. So it's like, who knows how technology actually is going to evolve? But for something from 20 years ago, that like did not know cell phones were coming and did not know how everything is going to go. They surely knew how to read the tea leaves well because this list is chef's kiss, just excellent. So I don't want to spoil it here. Do
Yeah.
go ahead and check that out for yourself and be pleasantly amazed by what they went on going for. Um, and yeah, it's
Yeah.
just wonderful. Just wonderful.
There's a reply to this too that says, as suspected, we are in fact in the bad timeline, which is like, yep, that's pretty good.
It's 100% accurate.
Yep.
As always, I want to personally thank everyone for listening in this week. Please be sure to follow us on mastodon.social@codecompletion to know when new episodes go live, and feel free to tweet at us if there's ever a topic you'd like for us to dig into. Most importantly, as a small podcast, please be sure to share this with your friends and family who are also interested in any part of the process of app development. It's your support that enables us to continue doing this, and we hope to grow a healthy community around everything we discuss. Once again, I want to give my thanks to Spencer, who's at Spencer C. Curtis. That's SpencerCurtis for joining me this week. My name once again is Dimitri. You can find me at Dimitri Buñol. That's DIMITRIBOUNIOL. And we'll see you all next week.
Bye.
Okay, so for Commented Out, I wanted to talk a little bit about my learnings from building a codable data store.
Yeah.
Namely, with regard to performance. So I learned a lot while building a database. I didn't initially set out to build a database, which is why I did not call it Codable Database. I called it Codable Data Store, something lightweight, something that is not going to take a ton of implementation, right? It's just going to be
Mm-hmm.
8, 9 files. Like, do we need folders to organize this?
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
Maybe,
yeah,
maybe
yeah.
not. 30,000 lines of code later.
Oh my gosh, dude.
I don't know if it's 30,000. It's definitely over 10. But a whole lot of lines of code later, I have built an ACID compliant database, which is more than most databases.
Nice,
Um,
dude.
it is not something. Okay, so it is functional at this point. Like, finally, the line in the sand of like functional has been crossed. This can be used. I would not suggest anyone use it at this stage because it is missing unit tests. A whole lot of unit tests. It's been kind of
Fair.
prodded at. Like, I do some hanky doodle tests of like throwing a few 100,000 entries at it and seeing how it behaves. So it does stuff. It should function, but it will likely break. The underlying file format will likely change and render all data you've saved completely unreadable. So do consider those things before trying it out. But it is ACID compliant, and you might be wondering what ACID compliant is. And let's see if I can remember what the acronym is without looking it up while Spencer looks it up.
Yeah,
Uh,
I don't remember either.
so you have atomic, which means that every transaction is atomic. It's not just, oh, I want to increment a value on the database, please increment it. That's not ACID.
Right.
This is, hey, I want to read a value, make a decision, write to this, write to that, read another value, and then write to this over here. That whole thing has to complete without being impacted by anything else. And if anything changes about those assumptions, the thing that I read at the beginning, if that changes before I finish my write, that transaction
Uh-oh.
is no longer atomic. So it has to be as if I did this before anyone else considered anything. So that's what the A in ACID
So,
means.
are you like using a lock or something to
No.
do that? Oh.
Well, I guess technically, if you consider actors, like, they do
Oh,
their
okay.
thing, but this does not necessarily lock. It just serializes
It's
all your write transactions. So as you start a transaction, if you want to start another write transaction, it always happens after the
after. Okay.
previous write transaction. If you want to start a read transaction, that can go ahead and start at any time because it grabs a
Mhm.
snapshot of the data store at that moment in time. Because every mutation I'm making to the data store basically writes brand new data to disk, and it just shares the data that did not change in the process. So anything
Okay.
can always reference an older version that is a few seconds old or a few milliseconds old even, and
Mhm.
that one will be completely in its entirety, like consistent. And that's what the
Sure.
C, and that's what I was trying to think of. That's what
Aha!
the C, and you can tell me if I got this right. Is it consistency?
It is
Okay,
consistency.
cool. And that's consistency. So this means that uh, anything that you write has to end up in a consistent state. You cannot have a data store that If you were to write two things at the same time, you end up in an inconsistent state, which like you don't know which one you ended up getting, right?
Right.
If you read one and then you increment it to two, and then the other one read one and increments it to three, that one might fail, or that one might have to wait until it reads two and then increments it to four, you know? Um,
Mhm.
so you end up in a very consistent state every single time because of these transactions. The next letter on this list is I, and I think this stands for integrity.
Nope.
Nope. Darn. What's it stand for?
Isolation.
Isolation. Okay, so this is what I was talking about before, where while you're writing to the database, other things can read from the database without being impacted by what is happening in the writes because they have a whole copy.
So you don't like if you're writing something, it's not locking the whole database basically. It's
It is
only
not.
locking the
Uh,
part that it needs to worry about. You could access other things
You can even
in complete
access that
isolation.
record. Say you're writing to a record, you can read a previous version of that record that's a few milliseconds old once again,
Okay. Yep.
and not be impacted by the writes that are happening right then and there. And that brings us to the last letter, which is D, and this stands for durability.
Yep.
Okay, and this means that, hey, you finished your transaction, great, and then someone unplugs the computer. Your thing that you got success for actually saved. So this
Mm.
means that at the end of every transaction, before the transaction finishes, everything got saved to disk, saved to permanent storage, and is accessible even in a failure situation. So uh, I did not set out to build an ACID compliant database. I set out to just build transactions because transactions are cool. And in building transactions, you get all of these properties, which is really, really nice. So, um, in the context of an iOS app, this means that if your user force quits apps frantically, if you got success that your thing got saved, your thing is durable.
It's saved.
If you are reading a record on one screen, but then writing to it in the background based on a network request, not going to be impacted. If you need to make concurrent reads on different threads and queues and things like that, it's all going to work. If you need to make sure that as the user is doing something, that a network update does not mess with what the user is doing, it's all going to work as well. So if you need to modify two different records from two different data stores at the same time and make sure that they're in sync properly, because you want to make sure, like, say if you have a book tracking app and you have authors and books, right? You need to make sure that as you update a book, you update the author and vice versa.
Right.
You can do this in one transaction and it's all going to be safe.
Nice.
So that's going to be my example app. I've been thinking about it in the
That's
back of my
cool.
head of like, I need something to kind of show how this all works. So that's,
Are you gonna write an app that does all that? Or are you
yeah,
just gonna like
a
cool.
super janky
Yeah, yeah.
UI of like, hey, here's books and here's authors, and this is how it all is linked together. Here's how you migrate from
Right.
one data set to another. So, um,
Cool.
yeah, that's what ACID compliance is. So that is one part of writing a database, right? It'd be cool to have this ACID compliance. It's also cool to have a cruddy database, right? So, and I
Yes.
say cruddy jokingly because CRUD is actually an acronym for
Right.
create, read, update, and delete, which is the four basic things that a database might need to do, or any
Right.
persistence really.
Yeah.
So I had, ironically enough, create an update done way before read and delete. And in the process of writing create an update, well, there was some performance hiccups. We can call them nicely, right? Of hey, I want to just deal with 100,000 records. That's not too many, right? Um, well, it turns out my naive implementation really suffered from having 100,000 things, which is defeats the whole point of having a database, right? It's like I could have just written
Yes.
this as a plist and be done with
That
it.
would be awesome. That's your database as a plist.
Ironically
Just
enough,
one.
it could be a plist if you write your own persistence plugin. It's a pluggable database. Um,
Mm.
but yeah, so if you did want to have a database, you need to support all these operations, and you need to support them performantly, right?
Right.
And I learned quite quickly, hey, using lazy, using filter, not great things to use when you need to do hundred thousands of iterations quickly, right?
Right.
And I got intimate with big O notations to kind of solve how to access this data as fast as possible without slowing down. Like adding an if statement would slow it down. Adding in a wait in a tight loop would slow it down. So getting rid of all of that as much as I could is what helped get the speed faster and faster. So if you're curious in terms of what kind of changes are necessary to increase the performance like this, you can just check out all the different PRs on Codable Data Store. Like you can see my process going through as I went and discovered what things played a part and what things didn't play a part.
Right.
Namely, don't test performance on debug. I got reminded of that once again because testing performance on release is way faster. So that makes
Yeah, I
you feel
bet.
good. Though you still want it to be fast on debug, so you can test it on debug if you want. But there were some changes I made that were slower on release but faster on debug. So
Yeah. Yes.
it's just part of doing performance work is you don't know what you're really going to be improving, and the only way to know is to measure. So I built a quick little test utility that just wraps a nugget of code and then just counts how long it takes over many iterations. And I saw, okay, compared to the overall like thing that I'm doing, does doing this 1,000 times. Is this a significant portion of that? Does it climb in percentage? Like, does it start
Right.
off as just 10% of the time, but then when you're at 50,000 entries, does it now take 70% of the time? That's a big. This thing is growing
Hmm.
faster than everything else. So if you solve this, you might solve a significant portion of the performance of the thing that you're writing. So that was another thing that I learned. Um,
Yeah. It
but
was it was very fun to see Dimitri's like messaging us in our Slack group about all of this. I think he started on like Tuesday or Wednesday, and it was very fun to like see this progression of like him trying to make it 10,000 entries. I think he started with,
mhm.
and seeing this like progression of like it's like took 300 seconds in debug, and then he got it down to something stupid good like well, yeah, 19 seconds for
It's currently
uh
at 7 seconds, and everything is correct.
yeah.
It was
I
at
mean
three
that's like
seconds, and things were not correct. So that needed some
mm,
tweaking. But it's
but
currently at 7.
magnitudes,
So
yeah,
I'm very
magnitudes
happy with
faster.
that.
So cool. Yeah, so it was very fun to like see this progression of like it's like going like this and now it's like whoop,
Yeah,
it looks
it's
really good.
very
So,
constant time, which I'm super happy with, because if you remember arrays, you want to insert random things in an array. It's not going to be constant time. It's going to be linear
yeah,
at best or at worst, I would say. Um, so this is a slightly different data structure. I don't know if it's a B tree. I'm not well versed in computer science enough to know the exact name for this, but it's an index of arrays that are of constant length. So if you need to change anything, you're changing at most one or two of those entries. And as long as
right.
you don't have a whole bunch of those entries, then you have relatively good performance. And this should last for most needs up to a few terabytes of data. I don't know. I think that covers me well. I don't think I need to do
Yeah.
more than that. So
No, I think that's pushing. Oh, so I did want to ask and I was going to ask in Slack, but um is this going to support like large I don't know, like videos, or are you just gonna like have them store it elsewhere and then like store a reference to it in the database itself?
So originally, I was gonna do the core data move of like, hey, if you want to store an
Yeah.
image, go ahead and store your image somewhere, and then go ahead and
Okay.
link it. But
Yeah.
then I
Yeah.
realized I built all the things to support like larger than my page size data. Right? If you have 16
Okay.
megabytes and the pages are 4 kilobytes, it will chunk that 16 megabytes accordingly and place them in individual
Mm,
pages.
okay.
So you could 100% store images in Codable Data Store, and it should work fine. The only thing is you should not store them as data within another larger object, because then that's going to turn into base64 and just be like 3/4 larger,
Yes.
which is not
Yes.
ideal. But if you did store it as a separate data store, so say you have one data store for your actual data
Hmm.
and a separate data store for your images that are keyed by an ID, then you can go ahead and just fetch, hey, I want the image for this ID, and it's going to give you that data. Um, so that is something that's also going to work just fine. And it should be a little bit more efficient than just storing it on the file system, which will go ahead and
Oh.
waste the padding of the last 4 kilobyte block.
Hmm.
Because the way file systems work is every file is determined by a minimum block size. And if it is smaller than that block size, it uses that. If it's larger, it uses 2 or 3 or
Right.
4. Sorry.
No, you're good. So more efficient space wise, but like I have no idea how it actually works. Like you have to pull all of the 4 kilobyte pages for that file and like
Assemble.
assemble them. Is that going to be faster than just loading it off of the file system? Or
Maybe, maybe not.
uh,
I don't think
okay.
it's going to be faster than the file system, because you're going to have to load a whole lot more files than just one.
Yeah,
So there's that to contend with, but it would
maybe
also
it's
not be consistent with the file system if
true.
you were to just do it that way. Whereas if you were to do it this way, you can make sure that as you delete records, you delete the thing. As you create records, you create the thing, because you're doing everything in lockstep, right? If you add an image,
Hmm.
or if you replace
Yep.
an image, you might say, "Hey, delete the image from the data store," and then it's gone. Only if that succeeds. If it doesn't succeed, then the image stays there, and you don't lose your image. And
Yeah.
as a result of, so it would be a lot simpler for you to develop your image store along with your data store, right? Because
Hmm.
everything stays
Yep.
consistent. It's not terribly inefficient either, right? Because let's say you have a whole ton of images. So every image gets split up into, say, 3 pages, right? And you have 1,000 images. So you have a whole ton of pages. Well, you can choose, hey, for this data store, let's make the page size a whole lot bigger. One. So now
Okay.
you have
Yeah.
5 images per page. And then you can go ahead and very quickly load a sequence of
Hmm.
images if you want, if their IDs are in a good order. You can just load the sequence of images as an async sequence, and just have the data come in. So that's
Okay.
one way of doing it as well.
That's cool. That's fun. So, yeah, I guess by extension, you've kind of answered my question, but like you'll allow it to support multiple databases running at the same time. Yeah,
Yeah.
cool. That's
Yeah,
fun.
so you
I'm
have one
excited.
persistence that's on disk, and you can have many data stores that are associated with it.
Sure.
Every data store can be written concurrently, because at the end of the day, they don't like touch each other. Though
Hmm.
in one transaction you can write multiple, and that would kind of block the other ones. So that is something to consider. Everything can be read concurrently, no matter what. And the persistences, currently there's only one. It's a disk persistence. I plan on having a memory persistence, which will be useful in
Hmm.
your app's unit tests, so that way you can make sure,
Yeah.
hey, I want to just like run through a sequence with this static data. Let me make a memory persistence with that
Hmm.
static data and plug it in at the beginning, and then all your SwiftUI views have that static data to work with. That is mutable, right? You can go ahead and change it in
Right.
the view, and it would persist in memory.
Hmm.
Um, and then down the line, I'm thinking, hey, it would be pretty easy to have a distributed persistence as
Right.
well.
That'd be
And this is
fun.
something that can allow multiple client servers to talk with one central server that is managing the persistence, kind of like a database
Right.
server.
Yeah.
So that is like way down the line. I'm not building that one anytime soon,
For V
but
one. Yeah.
the model extends to that. It's just a protocol persistence, and then if you implement the few dozen methods that are necessary, then it would work, right?
Yeah. Now you just need to I already forgot what it was called. Um have that, extension macro that we talked about at the start of the show. Just, make the conformance for you. It's that easy.
That would be different for every single thing, but
No, 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 no. I joke.
so yeah, getting very close to finally being able to use this in apps. There's quite a bit left to do. Like, I don't know, indexes of other things other than the ID might be important. Maybe depends on like your use case. If you're just storing stuff and then never retrieving it, that's fine. But if you
Yeah.
wanted to like store stuff and then retrieve it for a list and not load all of it in memory, an index is useful. So all the code for managing the index, since the primary listing is an index at the end of the day, is there. So just need to do the rest of it. um,
Cool.
it's like step one, draw the
Yeah.
circle. Step two, draw
Draw
the
the
rest of
L.
the owl. um,
Yeah.
but the step two has been going quickly because yesterday I added read and deletes, and those were very straightforward now that I had the updates in place, because the updates needed
Mhm.
to be able to read data and update it. So the read part is just, well, let me just delete all that updating code and you have a read. And the delete is, oh, let me just delete half of the updating code that would replace the data with something useful after I deleted the old one.
Right.
So everything is kind of coming together, as they say. So looking forward to getting to a place where everything is kind of good enough to use in an app, which is my like goalpost, because I wanted to build an app and therefore I spent all this time building this instead. um
Classic.
Classic. So once I get to the point where this is good enough to build an app, development might slow on this for a little bit as I start to use it in a real thing. And then
Oh,
at
that's
that
good.
point, that's when I'm going to make the biggest learnings of like, oh, this was a bad decision, and need to go back to the
Well,
drawing board a little bit. So
yeah, I mean, that's exactly like we talked about with the proposal on the macros. People started using the like, oh, it's missing this. So that's, I think, a very invaluable part of this process.
yeah, feedback, right? Um,
Yep.
so if you're interested in codable data store, I encourage you to follow along. It's been a very fun journey developing it and learning about like how databases should work and how they are put together. And it's a good lesson in that. I'm not really ready yet to accept like other people contributing, because it's still like mostly planned out in my head and not put on paper in
Yeah.
any form. So I want to get that part done. And then once I start slowing down, improving it as I start using it, that's when I would be more open to having other people help contribute and make it better as well. So until that point in time, just hold tight and watch along. Don't use it, please. You are going to lose data. I added a nice warning at the top. It's like, warning: you will lose your data if you use this, because
Nice.
you will likely lose your data if you use this. But getting there.
Yeah, I'm sure at the very least, when it does get to a point where you do want it to, like, your V1 or whatever, I'm sure Dimitri would appreciate people using it in apps, though, and
Yeah,
giving feedback.
I'll let
Again,
you know
you
when it's
may
when
lose
it's
your
safe to
data.
use, because I do
Yeah,
plan
yeah,
on once I like reach a certain point in time, probably shipping my first app with it. I will want to maintain its ability to not like lose access to that data long term. So
yes.
any update past that point will support backwards compatibility with older data stores. There are provisions in the API to warm up the data store, for instance. That way you can go ahead and like update everything in the background while showing a UI with progress, so that way the user knows, hey,
Oh,
my
nice.
data is migrating. I just got to hold tight rather than watch a spinning wheel for who knows how long, right? Don't
Yeah,
you all love those? So I don't
they're the
want I
best.
don't love those. So I built it as part of the API. It's like, you're gonna have a progress indicator
That's
that's going
nice.
to show you as it's marching through updating data, what the status looks like. So that is something that is going to be useful there. And then I don't know. There were other things planned. Oh, I want to make sure that you have like undo that survives cross launches, because iOS apps, they're kind of ephemeral.
That's
Um,
nice.
and that would be very cool to have. So you just have persistent history since the beginning of time that you can just undo all the way. It will probably
That's cool.
stop anytime a migration happens, because like there's no point
Mm,
undoing past that point. Um, but yeah, it should be relatively full featured for most app needs. The only thing that I thought of that will be missing from 1.0 and probably most versions up after that point are things like full text search, which I'm sorry, that's complicated. I know how to add it. I will add it eventually,
yeah.
but it's kind of after everything else. So gonna get everything else done first.
Cool. That's exciting. Yeah, we're on our Slack group. I think we're all super excited about it, especially like me and Fernando. I think are ready to like just throw it in our apps and like start using it. So
As long as you're
definitely
okay losing data, go for it.
that I don't care. Yeah, Fernando's like I want to use it at work. I'm like okay, dude. that's that's cool.
Yeah. The only thing missing from all my plans is how to like be financially viable over all this work that I put into this sort of thing. So
Yes.
until then, please listen to our show and
Hey.
download my wife's app, because that's the only app that we have for sale. And I don't know, spread the love. That's how you can support it for now. I don't know
Yep.
if I'll like set up a Patreon or something, or GitHub sponsors, or
GitHub sponsors. Yeah, those are cool.
I'll think of something for those that want to uh, have a support plan. That's probably what I'll do. Is I'll have a support plan that costs a lot of money for big companies.
Yeah,
That
there you go.
if they
That's
want
good.
help, and you are part of a big company, that's just give me money and I will help you.
I think that's
And
what Realm does. Maybe.
is it financially viable? I don't know.
Well, yeah. Realm Swift.
Because
Yeah,
I
I don't
would
know.
love for this to be my job. Like write
That'd be
components
sweet.
for other apps. That sounds totally awesome. The only way that can be my job though is if I were to work for Apple and then I have to like not do anything else, which I don't want that to be my job. So this is like a good middle ground so long as I can kind of make it work. But for all intents and purposes, this will 100% be free. It's released under the MIT license. So as long as you say where you got it from, you're a-okay to use it for anything.
Nice.
And yeah, I think that's how open source software should work for the most part.
Yeah, definitely.
Sounds good. Thanks for
All right.
listening, everyone.
Bye.